Welcome back. Final stretch. What we're going to do in this one is take a look at all the footage that was made available to us, the projects from which Axel culled the footage that he used for his reel, and talk about some of the benefits and some of the drawbacks of using some of that stuff. Then we'll take a quick look at a short clip from his reel, just to refresh, and then we'll take a look at the final, and then we can talk about the strategies that went into making that final. So here's all the stuff that we had to work with. This is all of the projects that went into Axel's reel. He sent them to me, and I immediately looked through all of it to get a gauge on what we had, and then I started to organize it into A, B, and C groups. Like this, the red highlighting was the stuff that I really wanted to use. The yellow was kind of backup stuff, and what I didn't highlight was like, let's just stay away from that if at all possible. So, and what's an example of stuff that I thought was great? Let's take a look at this one, which is about 4 minutes long, which is awesome because that means there's a lot of stuff you can pull from here. Now, what's even better is that there's a lot of variety of shots in this, and a lot of beautiful stuff. Like that shot, I think is great. A lot of this stuff is great, and because it almost feels like each of these shots could come from different projects, you could actually use this one project several times in the reel without it feeling repetitive, like without it feeling like you were going back and showing the same stuff over and over and over. Which I think a lot of reels have that problem where somebody really wants to feature something and so they go back to it over and over and it ends up feeling like, oh, we've seen this already. But in a project like this, I mean, look at all this stuff. There's so many different things that you could go back to without ever suggesting that it's the same project. If you move later in the project, look at all this stuff. This is really beautiful, that frenetic live action footage, 3D stuff, great. Look at these car moves, that's awesome. So there's plenty of stuff to pull from in this. Whereas, let's say in one of these sort of what I would call the B category footage, like let's take this. Now, this one also is fairly long. And what's interesting about this is that I think that it actually has some cool ideas. Like this is two guys playing baseball on the top of two buildings. And that's kind of cool, but I think that where it lacks is that the look isn't quite as refined or interesting. So if there were a similar shot or a shot that accomplished a similar thing in one of the so-called A-grade pieces of footage, then I would prefer to use one of those, like this, which you might recognize this from the original reel. Stylish, well done. The shots are interesting. I like that. There's a lot of stuff in this, and again, this one's several minutes long, so there's plenty of footage to pull from. This one, a little poppier, more TV, but I think that there's a lot of energy in this project. That's all great because we've got a ton of this stuff, lots of very usable footage, plenty of filler, as I would call it, and then you've got this stuff that I really didn't think I was going to use. I wanted the reel to be, sophisticated and quote unquote badass, so I didn't think I wanted this like Disney Channel open with kids pretending to have magic and Selena Gomez with butterflies. Not that that's bad, but I wanted to, select footage. If I had the option, I would select footage that was a little bit more adult, a little bit more sophisticated. So that's basically how I went about figuring out what would be my go-to footage. Let's just go ahead and take a look at what footage was selected and how it was used in the original reel, mostly just as a refresher. Let's just take a look at, let's start here. I thought some of these shots, like that's kind of good footage, but it just sort of, it doesn't seem like there was a whole lot of decision making in terms of how it was going to work with the music. And a shot like this seems to kind of just go on past its welcome. We're not really getting much additional information. As well as something like this, where a logo resolves and it's kind of sitting there, you've had enough of it by the time it's done. I think there are a lot of instances like that, and I think that gives us a lot of opportunities to tighten this up overall. So let's go ahead and look at the final. This is a big reveal. We'll look at it a couple times because it's going to go pretty fast. So here it is, the reimagining of Axel's reel. Alright, there you have it. A couple things you might have noticed. I went ahead and used the alternate logo instead of the one that I had shown before. I just thought it was a little cooler, and for the purposes of this demonstration, we all know what his name is, and I don't think legibility is really that big of an issue. Also, these icons may seem bigger because I had built this intro at 1280 by 720 and then realized that all the footage that was available was somewhere between 960 540 and 720 486. So I just went ahead and did the whole edit at 960 540, which meant that throwing that intro in there shrunk the icons down to a point where they weren't as legible. So I just I blew it up a little bit. I would have liked to have had them smaller. I just liked it better, but this is they're easier to read this way. There are a few things that we should talk about in terms of strategies for how we got here. The first one, and maybe the most important, was to choose the best stuff out of what we had. I think the original chose some of the best stuff, but then also left in a bunch of the not best stuff. And to play off of that same idea is that once you've chosen the best stuff, you only want to show the best parts of that, and I'm talking down to the frame. So if you have a great piece of footage, that's great, use it. But at the same time, don't use all of it if you don't need to. Sometimes a great piece of footage has moments where it's in a lull. Sometimes it communicates its idea and then continues to look good but doesn't develop any new ideas. And when a piece of footage stops developing a new idea, then you need to have already cut away from it for the purposes of a reel. Because a reel really needs to continue to develop at every single moment. So basically the rule is that you never linger on something that's ceased to present new ideas. And how you do that is you always cut on the action and not on the pause. That's sort of the thing that you can keep in mind, that phrase. Cut on the action, not on the pause, which means basically that while a piece of footage is evolving and showing new things, then it's good, keep on it. But if it ever gets to a point where it's stopped doing anything, or it's come to a rest, or overall the idea has been explored, then you need to have cut away from it already and moved on to something else. Also, additionally important is never repeat yourself. And I've tried to do that in this reel. Now, some of the first footage we see, that stuff I never come back to. This stuff I never come back to, although these sort of, I don't know what they are, like carbon fiber fabrics or something. I mean, they look cool. I actually do return to this stuff all the way at the end, just as a way to kind of cap off the piece. But I think it's fairly unrecognizable. I don't think you sit there and think that's exactly the same thing I saw before. But that's really the only instance of a spot where I'm repeating anything, and it's definitely not the same footage. It's just a similar idea to what we saw before, so not a big deal. Now, there are cases where you can repeat yourself if you're trying to do it intentionally for maybe comedic effect or dramatic effect or whatever. But for the most part, you want to continue to present new stuff. This is kind of a corollary of the idea that you just want to keep presenting new ideas. As far as the cutting itself, I think for the most part, for most reels and most purposes, you want the music to motivate the cuts. So, you know, in a situation like this song, which is really strong, there's a lot of motivation coming from the song itself. So I've, taken a lot of opportunities to cut to the song, and I think that helps tie what you're seeing to what you're hearing, and then the visuals and the audio start working together and they start playing together. If the song that you're using has a regular beat, you don't necessarily need to drive your cuts to that beat. The cuts can still they can play around that beat, but they need to sort of be almost like, you can think about them musically. You can think about them like another instrument that's being paired with the rest of the instruments in the song. It's going to play a slightly different role, but it's still going to thematically work with all the other instrumentation in the song. Another thing that you really should always be considering in whatever you do is creating narratives. By which I mean, if this shot needs something to follow it, it probably shouldn't be something completely unrelated. There should be some kind of connection from this shot to the next shot. And that could be as simple as the two shots share a common color, or maybe the camera is moving in the same direction, or in this case, maybe they're sharing almost everything. There's two female singers in the middle, and there's a lot of pink and fanfare. This when you're looking at two pieces of footage from one project, it's pretty easy to make a connection between the two, which is why you can adopt a strategy like grouping projects in a reel, where you kind of tend to keep the footage from a single project in a single section in the reel. And it's not absolutely necessary, but it's certainly an easy strategy to adopt. But in the case that you don't do that, let's see if I can find... Here's an example of where I've done that, where I'm taking two completely different projects and sort of making a narrative connection between two shots within those projects based on the way that the camera moves and the way that the elements are moving within it. So we go directly from this thing flipping, or the camera's flipping around, and this object is coming at the screen really fast, just the same way that this car is. And the camera in this shot is also flipping around. So there's kind of a marriage between the two shots because you have continuity of movement. Now, the color scheme is different, the content is different, pretty much everything about these shots is different except for the movement of the elements and the movement of the camera. So you get this continuity through that cut, and it works, I'm gonna go ahead and congratulate myself and say that it works pretty well. Let's just play that. So you really feel the way that one element almost turns into another because the connection between their movements is so strong. And also, very importantly, because where the eye is being led, in this shot, your eye is basically going to start tracking this object. As we whip around, we catch that thing just for a frame. And then when the cut happens, the car is basically in the same spot that that object would have been in on the next frame. So your eye is expecting that object to keep moving in the same direction, and instead this cut happens, and here's where your eye is. So now it's a very natural cut for your eye, and it actually feels like that whole movement is one thing, right? So that's kind of a successful way to do things. Now I've tried to do that a lot in various ways over the length of this piece. Here's a good example of where it was already being done in the footage. It's a section here. So we're watching this car. Here's where I did it. I took the footage of this car. It's coming a little bit from left to right on the screen, so your eye is tracking left to right, and then the cut happens and that car is still tracking left to right. So your eye is sort of following that movement, and it flows right through the cut. Now, this is one of the cuts that I actually kept from the footage coming up here, where this car comes around the corner and then comes at you, and then well, actually, that's a cut that I made. I made this cut, but here's a great example of where it already existed in the work. Now you're looking at this speedometer, and then the needle on the left starts jamming really hard off to the left, and then the camera follows it. So the camera is now is panning to the left really hard, and then there's a hard cut, and the camera keeps panning off to the left, and where that needle was, right about in here, now there's a car, boom. So you've got two things that are sort of continuous across that cut, and it makes it flow all the way across. So I went ahead and used that because I thought it was a great moment, and it's the kind of movement that you want to maintain in a reel like this. Now the next cut is a little bit rougher because the car is kind of down here, and what I cut to is an object that's directly in the center, and there's no movement in the camera. So a little harder, but I am fading out, so it's kind of an indication to the eye that we're changing gears a little bit. So these are some of the things that you want to do from cut to cut. If you take a look at the reel again, you'll kind of see it happening in as many places as I could make it happen. I think there are plenty of flaws in this reel, but that's something that I really tried to maintain, 'cause that helps keep up the energy and helps connect all these very disparate pieces of footage together so that they don't feel like they're all just random. They feel like they kind of belong together. Another thing that I tried to do was to use the musical cues to denote kind of chapters almost in the reel. So yeah, like here, okay, we've got this section coming out of that awesome racetrack footage where we kind of shift gears because the song shifts gears. So let's look. So, that's something that will help, again, tie the audio and the video together in a really useful and entertaining and exciting way. Again, it makes it feel like the audio and the video belong together and that it's not just two random things that are thrown into the pot. Overall, I think the best way to sum this strategy up, the way that I put this together, was to think about your reel as an experience, really think about it as a short film. It's got the structure of a short film. It's just that the footage that's going into your film is a bunch of stuff that's already been made. So it's a really abstract short film, but it needs to feel like it has significant moments. It needs to feel like it has some arc. It needs to feel like it has swells and dips, and you need to take somebody through an experience. This isn't a slideshow. It's not meant to show how much work you've done. It's meant to show how well you do it, but it should also be entertaining and interesting to watch, and not just be a catalog or, a historical record of what you've done. You want your reel to be an enjoyable, enticing, watchable, and hopefully, rewatchable piece. You want somebody who's seen it to call over their friend who sits next door and say, "You have to see this." You want it to be exciting so that it's memorable, because the point is not just to show your work, but to show it in a way that people will remember. And if you've accomplished that, then you've really done something for yourself. It's of course debatable whether this reel accomplishes any of that, but I personally enjoy watching it. So I think for me, it totally succeeds on that level. So there we are. We just made a reel from start to finish. Or I did. You just kind of sat there. I don't know why you didn't help more. I hope that was helpful. If it was, let me know. I'd like to make more of these. I don't know how you'll find out when more of them come out. Maybe... Oh, you could subscribe. I'll make a channel and you could subscribe. And then you'll find out when they're out. And until then, enjoy.